Event is scheduled to start at 12 o'clock. We're going to take another 5 minutes just to allow people to walk in. And then if you could please make sure that you have a parking pass in your vehicle because they will issue a citation. I don't want you to have your car towed like mine. Okay. And there's some water in the back. Take this opportunity to network, meet some people here, and then we'll go ahead and get started in about 5 minutes. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Once again, welcome to the California State University Dominguez Hills. My name is Raul Guzman. I'm director of the OSHA Education Center here. And today's presentation is in support of Safe and Sound. And Safe and Sound is a national campaign that has been around since 2017. I believe the first year we had about 2,700 businesses who participated, and that number has just been growing every year. And the purpose of Safe and Sound is to identify how safety programs can have an impact in occupational safety and health in the workplace, and how it can assist a business in keeping workers safe. And so today we have our speaker, Luis Ortiz. And sorry, before I before I present Luis Ortiz, I want to make sure that for attendees joining online this session, make sure that they know that this is being done in a webinar format. And so currently we have about 132 participants online. Here in person, we have about 20. And there's going to be an opportunity to ask questions. If you could please use the Q&A button to enter your question, and that is located towards the bottom of your screen. And so we have Luis Ortiz. He is the founder and CEO of Safety First Management, LLC. He's also the ASSP Long Beach chapter post-president. Post-president, okay. I thought it was current president. And then ASSP 2025 national speaker. He's also an OTIEC instructor here with us. So please welcome Luis Ortiz.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you all can hear me virtually and in person okay? Okay, great. As Raul said, my name is Luis Ortiz. That's a little bit of my background. What I'm actually most proud of is teaching here at the OSHA Training Education Center. There are 27 OSHA Training Education Centers across the country, and there's 3 in California. So it really is an honor to teach here. And at these courses, we teach adult learners. So either folks that have been in safety for 20 to 30 years, and they're going to take some classes because they want to be an OSHA 10 and 30-hour trainer. Some of our students, this is their first day. So again, it's really an honor to teach here. My specialties are OSHA compliance, right? I'm an instructor here, so I teach various courses. I also really focus on safety management systems. That's, I'm a big proponent of transitioning from being the safety hero to using management systems. So I presented at the last National ASSP, that was my topic, transitioning from heroes to safety management systems using the ANSI Z10 framework. That's a collaboration between ANSI and ASSP. They put together a management system framework called Z10. And we live in California, so you all know that workers' comp claims and costs are very significant here in the state of California. So that's one of my areas of specialties. Just to kind of clarify, if someone gets injured, that's an OSHA recordable. But for example, if they leave the organization and submit a post-litigated claim, that affects your workers' comp. So in a way, they're 2 separate things, but they're also related, right? So why did that employee leave the company and then litigate, right? First of all, why did they even leave the company? So coming up with ways to engage employees while they're with your organization, try to prevent them from leaving, and when they do leave, they don't litigate against the company, specifically in California. So yeah, that's my areas of a specialty. And, all right, so all right, so here's the agenda. Raul already talked about welcome and gave you a little background to OSHA Trainee Education Center. As he mentioned, I'm affiliated with the ASSP Long Beach chapter. ASSP is one of the oldest organizations for safety. I think they're about 119 years old. And so I'll talk a little bit about that. And then my topic for today is emergency response, emergency preparedness and response. Now, the way I like to teach is I like it to be very interactive. So even though we have almost 200 people virtually, I like to ask questions and I like facilitation and answers from everyone. So I may ask a question and say, somebody in person, what do you think? Virtually, what do you think? So definitely want this to be engaging. You don't have to wait till I'm done to ask questions. You can raise your hand and ask a question or a comment anytime. All right, make sure I got this clicker going the right way. All right, great. So as I mentioned, I'm an instructor here at the OSHA Training Education Center. And I mentioned, how many are in the state of California? 3, great. And how many are nationwide? 27, good, it's a good start. And besides, those are that's how many locations. The programs offer certification programs. There's courses that are through the OSHA Training Institute, so those are specific OSHA courses. There's certification programs, and then there's courses that are separate of certification programs that are not necessarily affiliated with the OSHA Training Education Center. So an example could be like, how do I effectively communicate as a safety professional? That may not be an OSHA course, but it's something we offer here at the OSHA Training Education Center. So there's more than 50 different courses offered. I teach the OSHA 511, the 510, the 500 series, lockout, tagout, machine guarding, record keeping. Those are just some of the courses that I teach. But there's also, for example, I may talk about electrical safety for 1 hour. We have a course here where it's 4 days. So definitely lots of different courses for different people. There's 2 OSHA certificate programs, again, specifically endorsed by OSHA. And then the university here, CSUDH, they have 6 of their own. The classes are hybrid, so there are students that are in person, there's students that are virtual, and great technology, so whether you're taking a course virtually or you're here in person, you still get the same great learning environment. All right, so as I mentioned about ASSP, it's one of the oldest and largest national safety groups. I'm sure you've heard of like National Safety Council, and then it's ASSP. Those are kind of the top 2, really the biggest. And the goal, ASSP supports occupational safety and health professionals in their efforts to prevent workplace injuries, illnesses, and fatalities by providing education, advocacy, standards development, and a professional community to members to advance their careers and their profession. So if you're a safety professional, you should be a member of ASSP, regardless of what chapter you join. But I'd recommend you join the Long Beach chapter. Every month we have educational events, we have social events, we have a $5,000 scholarship that we give to our members to take courses. So for example, if you got a scholarship through the Long Beach chapter, CSUDH will actually match a course for you. So you end up getting 2 courses, approximately worth $1,600 for free as getting the scholarship. And I see a few folks in the room that were recipients of that scholarship. So it's good to see folks get scholarships and still come back to support. And all right, with that being said, we can get started. So emergency response training, emergency response. It's actually a topic that could be applicable to almost every safety program. For example, if you have confined space entry, that's an element. Even a fall, right? If somebody's at work and they fall and get injured on a roof, how are we going to get that person down? So really, it's a topic that, again, it can expand to almost everything that we do in safety. But there is specific regulations specific to just emergency response and preparedness. So there's OSHA rules specifically for that, but there are other elements of your programs that you're going to have emergency response as well. So it's a great topic. This is where I'd like some feedback. So virtually and in person, what do you all think are types of emergencies we could have? So You could raise your hand. Yes, in the back. What do you think? Earthquake, especially living in California. Earthquake is a type of emergency we could have. Okay, great. So remember virtual, we want to see your input too. Yes? A gas leak, that's a perfect example. A gas leak that causes an explosion, that definitely is a type of emergency. Yes? Active shooter, that definitely is an emergency. I saw another hand. Now, we say active shooter, but keep in mind, it's not just a shooter, it could be workplace violence. It could be someone that may not have a gun, they could have a knife. That's still workplace violence, which would then need some sort of emergency response. What about virtually? Do we have any responses yet for the virtual folks? Okay, great.
We have responses of flooding, hurricanes, microbursts, tornadoes, fires, building failures, active shooter.
Yeah, flooding is I wouldn't say a good one because no emergency is good, right? But flooding, yeah, we had to think about that. Any other ones? Yes. Power outages. What do you do if there's a power outage? I used to work at a bakery, and whenever we lost power to the bakery, any product that was inside that oven, the power would stop, the oven would stop, now you have product on fire. Really it should be tied to an emergency backup generator potentially to keep moving, but yeah, even something like a power outage could have significant impact to your operation. Yes?
Aging population, heart attacks, complications from diabetes, especially in the weather right now, heat stroke.
Yep. So the comment was medical emergencies, right? First aid injuries, cardiac arrests. Someone has a heart attack, but not cardiac arrest. That's a different response, right? We all know why we don't give CPR to someone that's having a heart attack, right? Because they're still breathing, right? They're still breathing, right? So someone saying my heart hurts, that's a different response than if someone, for example, is in cardiac arrest and they're not breathing. But we have to be prepared for either or because they're both potentially emergencies. You mentioned maybe bleeding as well. You had a great could you recap that with the mic on? I mean, you said it so well that honestly, I couldn't even repeat it back the way you did.
I was just mentioning that there's your more typical medical emergencies, heart attacks, strokes, especially with the aging population, complications from diabetes, and with the temperatures that we have here in Southern California, heat stroke or heat illness.
Exactly. Texas, same thing. Temperature, heat. Yeah, those are great examples of real life emergencies. What I like about those examples are, those are examples of things that could happen in an office, right? So when we sometimes think about emergencies, our brain may default to, a construction site, manufacturing, chemicals. But the reality is you could have an emergency at an office. What do we do? So great examples. All right. So this presentation is going to go over different types of emergencies. Now keep in mind, just like when we teach courses here at the school, you all are here for a reason. You're all safety professionals. So you all have a good experience. So this presentation is either A, to give you or maybe tell you something, or teach you something you didn't know, or B, it's a refresher, or C, it's a way to really think and challenge yourself. So if we were to do a little poll right now, let's do a little poll. And we answer virtually, you can answer virtual, you could show of hands. How many of you really, really feel that your organization is really, really ready for an emergency? Look, so you're here right now. If your organization had an emergency and you're not there, show of hands or virtually, do you think your team is really ready to respond to any type of emergency that could happen? If you think the answer is yes, raise your hand. Great, so I see 2. So someone rose their hand, and I was getting ready to ask the question, they said, wait, depends on the type. Everything and anything that could happen. You really just take a second to really reflect. Is your team really ready to respond to any and every type of emergency that could happen to them without you being there? Do they know what to do? Do they know how to respond? And if the answer isn't yes, it's okay, because I think that's really the experience, at least that I've had. You know, doing a fire drill once a year, does that really prepare people? Probably not. Doing first aid CPR training every 2 years and then not talking about it till another 2 years, are they really, really prepared? I remember when I used to help people, when I first started my career, I would use the dressing as the gauze and the other way around because I was so nervous, right? Obviously, with experience, I got more confident and I was calmer. But that's the reality. If we don't really prepare and we don't really practice, we may not be really ready. And so, as I mentioned, I respect all of us are safety professionals. We clearly know what we're doing because we're here. So just take this presentation as an open mind of, yep, I know this information, but am I really, really helping to execute and get my team ready to do this without me being there? Because to me, the test is, does your team know what to do when you're not there? That to me is the test of, are we doing our job? Do they know what to do when we're not there? Because if we are there and we take care of it, we're more of like the hero. And if we're not there and the team knows what to do, now we've implemented those management systems. So again, keep an open mind for the presentation. All right, so here are our learning objectives. Develop emergency response according to what OSHA wants or Cal OSHA requires. We have to assign responsibilities, who's going to do what, and when are they going to do this, and how do they know to do it. We're going to understand different types of processes, learn steps for handling emergencies, and address natural disasters that may affect the workplace. Okay, great. So those were our learning objectives, and then the course outline: emergency response, evacuation procedures, fire emergency, medical, extended power loss, chemical, severe weather. So a lot of the answers that you all gave are already on this list. But basically, the way that I think about it is, whatever emergency or hazard your employees are exposed to, they have to be trained on how to recognize those hazards and how to respond. So I remember I did a training, and somebody raised their hand. I think we were like 5 minutes into the training on day one. And someone raised their hand and said, is it safe to be directed to clean a room full of rats? It's like, wow, I haven't even finished my coffee yet. That's the first question. I was like, we're going to start off with like, good morning, nice to meet you. And that's a very direct question. So someone must have been directed, go into that room and clean, or at least they felt like that. And the answer is really simple. Whatever hazard your employees are exposed to, they need to be trained how to recognize those hazards and how to control them. So it may be difficult for us to come up with every hazard that could occur, or every situation. I think it's almost impossible. Maybe it's not, but we only have 2 hours of this presentation. So the point is that every company's different. You could be construction, aerospace, manufacturing. Every industry, every company's different. So what you really need to think about is, what are the hazards that our people are exposed to? What are the types of environments they're exposed to? And what do we need to do to train them and keep them safe? That's really what it comes down to. Pretty simple. So regardless if there's a rule or not, if there's a hazard, we have to train our people, and we have to tell them and teach them this is how you keep yourself safe. So, all right, let's get rolling. So OSHA does require some sort of emergency response and planning. Now, there is a rule that says that if you have 10 or less employees in a calendar year, so it's a calendar year, if your organization or establishment has 10 or less employees, again, in a calendar year, your emergency action plan can be verbal. That you still have to have one, though. Okay, and keep in mind that different companies, have different locations. So a location can be treated as an establishment separate of the entire group of companies. But essentially, you still have to have a plan. And if you have 10 or more employees, then you do have to have a plan in writing. Any questions on that, or it's good, pretty straightforward? Kind of a OSHA basic 101. Yes. Oh, they're bringing you a mic.
How would people being considered independent contractors factor into the number of employees?
Great question. It's a great question. If they don't fall under the scope of your company, like let's say you have a scenario where it's like a host employer and they're bringing in subcontractors, that would not count as your actual employee. So if you're asking, for example, if you brought in subcontractors or 1099s, would that count as being over 10 in that scenario? No. However, there are situations where if you're a host employer and you have like temp agency employees and you're directing those employees, then that would be added to your count. But if it's a true 1099 where you're not giving them direction and you're not telling them what to do, like as an employer, that's different. Very good question. Great question. But if you're the host employer and they're like temp agency employees, that's different because you're giving them direction. Not to jump into another topic, but if you're a host employer and you have temporary employees, keep in mind too, if they get injured, that may have to go on the host employer's OSHA log, where the temp agency covers workers' comp costs, but that may go on your OSHA log as a host employer. It's a great question about the 1099 and contractors. Good so far? Any other questions? Good? Okay, great. Great. So OSHA says you still have to have a plan, regardless if you have 10 or less employees. It can be verbal, but you still have to have a plan. And that plan is supposed to be a step-by-step guide. Now, keep in mind, if we write an emergency action plan, we still may need specific procedures. So your emergency action plan is, from A to Z, and then incorporated in that plan, you may need to have specific procedures for each type of emergency. So you're going to have to call that out. At this organization, here are the types of emergencies we have exposure to. And then you would lay that out in your emergency action plan. Typically, when OSHA does visit your company, they ask for they have a document request form. In the state of California, they always ask you for what? IIPP. Injury Illness Prevention Plan is always requested in California, or that's at least my experience. Now, some people have their emergency action plan wrote into their injury illness prevention plan. I've seen that. I've seen folks with, an IIPP that's like 185 pages. I would tell you that I really don't recommend that. I usually recommend standalone programs is my recommendation. Outside of California, there is no requirement to have an injury illness prevention program. So they may ask for, hey, do you have a safety and health management policy? But another thing that they always ask for is 5 years worth of OSHA logs. I want to throw that out there too. So if you've had injuries, your OSHA log could also guide us to the type of emergency responses. So if I read an OSHA log and I see amputation, I'm thinking a couple of things. How was this handled? Who called 911? And who cleaned up the blood? So it's what I'm saying is that emergency action plan or response, it has its own regulation. And to be honest, the regulation is not that beefy. I don't know if any of you have read it. It's not that long compared to like a lockout tagout program. But what I really like about emergency action plan and responses is that, again, it could apply to confined space rescue. It could apply to bloodborne pathogen cleaning up blood. It could apply to a fall on a roof. So it's a great topic that every safety professional should be pretty well versed on. So these emergency response plan, again, as I mentioned, it should address step-by-step natural disasters, include whom to notify, and must be in writing and kept in the workplace and available for review. So what are the elements? As I mentioned, you have to train employees on the hazards that they're going to be exposed to. So definitely employees do need to be trained. whenever you hire an employee, you have to do initial training. So if you bring in an employee, you should have some sort of like onboarding or new hire safety orientation, or even worst case scenario, even if it's a checklist, it's, you know, hey, here's a checklist. Did you give the employee a tour of all the exits? Yes. Did we train the employee on who to communicate or report an issue to? Yes. Now, I've looked in the OSHA standard. I didn't find where it says you have to do an annual fire drill. So I looked in the emergency action plan, OSHA requirement, the standard. I went to Cal OSHA, and I couldn't see where it says you must do a fire drill. If anybody looks it up and finds it, please let me know. You can throw it in the chat if you'd like. What the standard does say, though, is employees have to be trained to recognize alarm sounds. So in a way, to me, that kind of implies that you do need to do some sort of drill where the alarm is activated, because if you didn't do that, how would the employee know what that alarm sound is? Now, you could probably maybe do a new hire orientation, and here's a video, and here's the different types of alarm sounds. Technically, that could work. And remember, there's different types of OSHA regulations. There's OSHA regulations that are performance-based. Show me how you're doing this. Show me how you do this. Show me how you're in compliance with this. We call those performance-based standards versus something that's prescriptive, like lockout tagout. Show me your annual periodic lockout tagout review. You either have it or you don't. Show me you have procedures for equipment with 2 or more energy sources. That's a lockout tagout rule that's very prescriptive. You must have this and show me. Emergency response is more performance-based. This is how we comply with the rule. This is how we do this. This is how we do that. So in a way, performance-based is a little bit easier because it gives you flexibility to incorporate and do it the way you think is best. Where prescriptive is either you have it or you don't. So just wanted to throw those out there for clarification too. So we got to do training. People have to know what their expectations and responsibilities are. People have to know about the threats and hazards. So if you work, for example, at night and you work in retail, what could happen? Working at night in retail, what could happen? Yes. Power outage, I would say that would be, I'd be okay with that. What's something worse that could happen working at night and being retail? Yes.
Devin from online.
Yeah, definitely. Isn't that a hazard? Absolutely. We can't say to OSHA, well, all the employee had to do was give them money. They didn't do that. That's their fault. If you don't train your folks, they may think they had to jump over the counter and start wrestling the person, right? So you have to train people. This is what we want you to do. You have to train people. Because if you don't train them, then don't be surprised when you get people reacting very differently. Did you have a question or comment? They're going to pass you a mic.
Really like about it being performance-based, because I'm in a retail environment, and if you have 50, 60 employees at a location, it's difficult to do a fire drill type thing and have everyone evacuate.
Yep.
So I really like your comments about just teaching them and that they are aware of what to do. So thank you for that clarification.
You're welcome. So OSHA says, is it effective? Yes or no? And then they work backwards. Because if someone's injured, was the training, was the program effective? Yes or no? The answer in their mind originally is no, because someone got injured. But that's not always the case, right? So that's how they work backwards. So I would say with any safety program you have to think in your mind, how can I justify that this is effective? And again, to that point, working in retail is much different than construction. So we do need a lot of flexibility in how we do these programs. Now keep in mind, there are, that's more for record keeping. Because I was going to say some industries are exempt from certain programs. So retail, like record keeping, logs, that's what I was thinking. But so emergency would still apply. but how you do it is up to you. Good so far? Okay, cool. All right, great. So practice drills, duties, and hazards unique to the job. My recommendation is do quarterly drills. That's my recommendation. How realistic is that? That's up to you to figure it out, all right? But I really like quarterly because one quarter could be fire drill. One quarter could be earthquake. One quarter could be, what if there's a civil strife and we had to do a lockdown? That's perfect. Let's practice that. Severe weather. So if you could get your organization to practice quarterly different types of drills that are applicable, I think that's amazing. If you could do that. If not, maybe try to do annual, then semi-annual, and then try to get quarterly. But that's up to you all. Just keep in mind what I said or mentioned. If you don't practice something, when it really happens, are people really prepared? And to your point, you may raise your hand and say, quarterly's too much. It might be. If that's the case, then if it's going to be annual or semi-annual, maybe pick the one that has the highest likelihood. Maybe pick one that this is the most severe situation. So again, it's up to you to figure that out. But at the end of the day, it's the employer's responsibility. Yes, in the back.
Instead of practicing it, can we just basically cover it? Like just have the guys like, hey, this is what we do in case of an emergency as a crew?
Yes, as long as you document it and it's effective, meaning that if we went up to an employee and interviewed them, they should be able to speak to it. To your point, you didn't ask this question, but I was kind of thinking you were going this route. If you have an evacuation, like a power outage, you need to document that because that actually counts. Okay. If you have like, hey, the fire alarm went off and it was a false alarm and everybody evacuated, document that. That counts. So because it was a real evacuation, that counts. You document it. You could say, here's what went well. Here are the things we need to improve on. But definitely document that. Absolutely. A power outage, any emergency that happens, definitely document it, for sure. Great question. All right. Let's keep rolling. So we do need to have a written program. And your written program, someone has to develop that program. OSHA has some great resources. So if you go to OSHA.gov and you go to help and resources, or go to OSHA.gov and type in the search e-tools, there's great templates already set up for you for emergency action plan. And I will be honest, before I became a consultant, I never looked at OSHA.gov for resources or anything like that. If anything, I was like, I'm going to stay away from that website. And then when I became a consultant, I was like, this is amazing information that's available. I can't believe I didn't take advantage of this. So really, if you go to OSHA.gov, hit help and resources, there's amazing information for you. There's also an A to Z index where you can click on the A to Z index and type, you could type in W for warehousing. So great resources that are already available for you. And then, who's going to develop the plan, who's going to implement it. All facilities, if you have multiple locations, you may need to have separate plans. You may have to have scenarios where what are we going to do if we have to deal with this situation and we don't have access to the building. So, and then you do a risk assessment. What are the likelihood, what are the severity, et cetera, et cetera. And programs should be reviewed and updated. That I'm aware of, there is no regulation that says it has to be updated annually. But we should do that. Really, to me, this is a program that every year should be looked at to make sure, are we on track? Are we missing anything? Did we bring in new people? Did we bring in new staff? Are they fully trained? Because the reality is, if something goes wrong and it's an emergency, depending on how prepared, that could determine how well your employees do. Yes? Oh, they're micing you up.
So with the California State's violence prevention program, there is annual requirements for review.
Yes, there is. Thank you for bringing that up. There is an annual, and employees have to be involved and engaged in the training. Great observation. That program started in California last July, so we should already be on round 2, and it has to be interactive. So employees have to provide feedback. That WVPP, which stands for Workplace Violence Protection Program, it's its own regulation. So it's a standalone program. It does require annual training. It does require threat assessments, and you have to keep 5 years of logs of any workplace violence situations that have occurred. For everyone that's online, this is a California-specific rule, but keep in mind the general industry, there's still, not general industry. From the federal side, there may not be a specific rule, but if it's a recognized hazard, there could be some regulatory enforcement there.
And Washington is soon to adopt the same program.
Great, thank you for that information, appreciate it. And then Cal OSHA, what's something new in California that I'd say is relatively new, kind of started, I think, this summer? Yep, in the back. Wildfire, think of that one. I was going to go a different direction. Fall protection's another one. There were some changes there, I think, specifically to residential roofing.
Heat illness.
Heat illness. Now in California, there's an indoor heat illness program. Prior, it was only outdoor, which technically was construction, agriculture. When you read the scope, the outdoor heat program tells you what the scope was. Now in California, there is an indoor heat illness program. So again, those are all standalone programs, but still applicable. Interesting enough, when I was in Texas a couple months or last year, I remember I did training on heat stress, and I went back to the hotel and I was like, wait a minute, what's going on? I was having symptoms of heat illness. So you got to get you acclimated to where you're at. So just, again, keep that in mind. All right. So I really like this slide because it talks about these are the elements of a written program. And this PowerPoint will be available for you. But it's a really good slide because it tells you you have to assign responsibilities for reporting the emergency. Who's going to report it? How do they report it? How do employees, maybe they need to go to someone to report it. I work with some companies that calling 911 is not the procedure. You have to call a dispatcher and then they help you from there. So again, you have to train employees to know how to do that. Monitor the evacuation. I remember a couple years ago, there was a power outage and there was one employee. This was a factory that had 1,500 people. There was one employee that was like giving the lead or the supervisor an attitude, was like just being troublesome, right? I said, hey, stop giving her an attitude. She's just trying to give you direction. Please follow what you're asked or being told or being asked to do. I go do other stuff. I get a call about 10 minutes later. Hey, somebody just got injured. I said, somebody got injured? I walk over. I said, what happened? They said, somebody fell down the stairs as they were coming down. Guess who it was? It was the same person that was giving the supervisor a hard time. And one of the feedback I gave the person was, where was your mind when this was happening? Were you focused or were you distracted trying to give the person more of a hard time? Then you're the one that falls down the stairs and you get injured. That's my only experience, somebody getting injured during an evacuation. And it shouldn't have happened, right? So where are employees, their mentality? So just keep that in mind, right? Good communication, working together so that we're focused on what we need to do in an emergency. Who's going to perform rescue and medical or critical plant operation duties? What if it's a scenario where employees need to stay back to turn off the gas? Well, if they need to turn off the gas, do they have the tool that they need to do that? Maybe that tool needs to be tethered to that machine so that it's an emergency. They get there, the tool is there, boom, they use it in emergency. I don't know. I'm just giving you some examples of my experiences. ordering the, close the factory or the location. Maybe we need to contact the utility department. How do we do a chemical spill? Do we have the right chemical cleanup crew? Is that posted somewhere? And then this is more where I was referring to addressing the expectations for employees so that they're trained, they know what to do. So in the middle of an emergency, they're not giving the supervisor or the foreman a hard time. What are the types of hazards? So you have to assess the hazards. What are the different types of emergency? You all gave me examples already. How does that affect the business or the company? How each emergency would affect the operations? We mentioned hazards at the office, manufacturing and remote, and then response actions for potential emergency. Bringing back the example of workplace violence. Keep in mind that if you have remote workers, remote employees, and they're working from home and something potentially happens, someone knocks on the door and there's a workplace violence issue, that could be considered work-related depending on the situation. So just in general, make sure that even our remote employees are trained on the type of hazards that they would encounter as they're working from remote.
We have a question from one of the attendees that asks, are corporate written programs compliant for multiple sites?
Great question. Typically, plans are supposed to be site specific. Now, if you have a corporate template and the corporate template is specific enough to your operation, then that could potentially work. However, typically in a site specific emergency action plan, you have numbers like the local fire department, the local this, the local that. So a corporate template is good if it's being emailed out. So I worked for a large corporation that every month they'd say, all safety managers across the country, here is the corporate template for emergency action plan. Here it is. You have 30 days to make it site specific and return it back to us. So from that perspective, we had a corporate template. We would plug and chug, fill out everything that needed to be done, send it back to corporate. They would review it and approve it, and then we would train off that. That approach would work. If it's corporate and it's generic, then no, we would not, because it's not company site specific. I thought I saw a hand raised too. Yes.
So Sam Online, what about a company and contractor working side by side?
Great. Would need to be a little bit more specific in that question, but if what you mean is, well, it depends. If that working side by side, if there could be an emergency, then yes, your employee needs to be trained on how to respond, and if there are contractors there, how to guide or direct them. So for example, remember, in a lot of scenarios, you're still the host employer. So there are what's called OSHA multi-employer citations. So if you are the host employer, it could be your responsibility to make sure that those contractors are trained and they know what to do in the event of an emergency at your location if you're, for example, the controlling employer. Is that what they meant by that question and that answer okay? Okay, great. Good? Good so far? All right, great. Let's keep going. And then, so we talked about assigned responsibilities for, assess the hazards such as, now develop procedures. What to do in a fire. So I mentioned you have to have specific procedures. Reporting emergencies and alerting employees. How do we account for all employees after an evacuation? I like that one because how do we actually do that? That's kind of tricky because if you have a binder that's in your office that has a roster, when was that roster last updated? Just because you have a roster, that doesn't mean it reflects the employees that are there. What if you can't get to that roster because there's a fire that's blocking you from getting to that office? Now you can't get access to that binder or that roster. How are you going to account for the people? So maybe a scenario where we have a paper copy, but we also have an electronic copy, because if you just say I have an electronic, what if we lose the power? What if the system goes down? So you have to think about multiple ways to have this information available. And remember, during an emergency, typically, it can be very chaotic. It may be a scenario where someone's going to wait, instead of running and saving my life, let me go run to the office and grab the binder. Excuse me, active shooter, I need to get past you, right? Obviously, I'm joking there, but you all get the point, right? You have to think about how can they realistically get this information. It's not easy, right? Yes, I see a question with a hand raised. I was going to say before we get to that question, it's actually why I enjoy teaching. It's a little bit easier than actually doing, right? I'm just telling you what the rules are. I'm telling you in theory, where the rubber meets the road is actually executing and making these things happen. That's where we shine as safety professionals. Yes.
Due to the industry that I'm in, that we deal with staffing in a lot of companies, we have a internal program. It's called that just develops a roster called Who's In, Who's Out, and you can who's in, who's out. So basically, works off of the time clocks, and basically what that report does, you can access it via your phone, and there's other programs out there that are readily available, and it does something called Who's In, Who's Out, and it's based on your time clock system.
I like that. And to that point, what if that on-site didn't charge their cell phone the night before? Because you know, in Murphy's Law, right, is if it can happen, it's going to happen. Or what if during the emergency, they left the phone in the drawer, they can't get access to it? I still like it though, because it seems like to me, someone else would be able to gather that information for them. So I like that. That seems like you got some redundancy there. Hey, well, if they forgot their cell phone, somebody's got to call you to get that information. But you just got to think through that, because those are real life situations. Like when I first started helping employees that would like have an amputation or go to the hospital, sometimes they would leave via the ambulance and they wouldn't have what with them that's important. Their what? Their cell phone. So now how do we get a hold of this employee? And then we look at their emergency contact. Guess what we find out? It's not up to date, or the number that there is wrong. So I said these are real life things. So now I slide the phone in the person's pocket. I'll call you. No, you're just going to have to figure that out. Yes.
We have another question from Hilda online. She asks, do you record workplace violence for remote workers?
Absolutely. It's required. There's 4 different types of workplace violence according to the WVPP in California. And if it falls in any of those 4 categories and it's work related, you have to log it, and it has to be on a log for 5 years, and you actually have to follow up. So for example, if I were talking to someone and I say, you know that I kill you in a debate. Well, obviously I didn't just threaten that person, but if that someone else heard, I'll kill you, but they didn't hear the debate part, they report it, that could go on your log, and there would have to be a conversation where I would have to say, you know, I didn't mean it that way, don't talk like that. And then like next year, interesting now, is arguing and we're shouting with each other. The log is going to say, hey, a year ago, you and this person had a weird exchange. Now you're shouting at each other. Oh, it was nothing. Then the next year, now we're shoving each other. That's a problem. So the log is meant to capture what has been going on. And then as people leave and come in the company, the log is designed for you to see the historical without having to say, well, I just joined the company, so I don't know. Good? All right, great. So we talked about accounting for people, what to do, business closure. I think that kind of falls also like business continuity. If like you have a big industrial freezer and it goes down, where do you send your product? Potentially, yes.
So Cheryl online was asking, what about salary workers, and when it comes to who's in and who's out?
Great question. It doesn't matter. The way that I would think about it is, I wouldn't think about it whether they're salary or hourly. That to me doesn't really make a difference. The response is you have to have a procedure or a process in place to account for all employees regardless of their classification. Also, that includes contractors too. Imagine I've had evacuations and fires, and we go and someone's in the bathroom just taking their time. Like, hey, you realize there's an emergency, hurry up. So do you have a procedure to go in the bathroom and look for people? So those are all things that you do have to have in place, regardless if it's hourly, temp employee, contractor, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You got to be able to evacuate and have people accounted for. Yes, in the back.
How detailed do those plans need to be? Like for instance, the bathroom situation, is there a specific wording in your program to be like this certain person is going to be responsible for checking bathrooms? 'Cause I work in the construction industry, and so when we kind of divvy out the responsibilities, like we'll assign like, say, project engineer is going to walk floors 2 to 7 and you know, check to make sure everybody's out of there. So, but
So-
that's something that we do like as we review our EAP, and then we'll make those assignments. But do we need to specifically include like how specific do we need to do when we're making those programs?
Yeah, that's a good question. Off the top of my head, and anybody, by the way, anybody could fact check anything I say, for sure, right? It's almost impossible to know every rule and memorize them at every moment. So if I say something and you Google it, feel free to raise your hand and say, that's not what this says, and then I won't pick on you again. No, I'm just kidding. So definitely let me know if you think something different. Off the top of my head, I don't know if we have to name the actual individual, but we would want to name either their role, something to that effect, right? It can't be too generic that you have a scenario that no one really knows. And at the same time, I would see how it's problematic if you put people's names because people come and go in a company. So that's off the top of my head. It should be either the position or something to that effect. Yes, I saw your hand in the back.
I would try to make that as vague as possible. Having dealt with getting audited a few times from OSHA, it's good not to just set a certain person. I would try to just make it to where it's supervision or employees. That's the best way to word it.
Yeah, and I could see that point, right? As long as it's, remember, at the end of the day, we're dealing with people's lives, right? So we don't, OSHA standards are the blank. What we call them, OSHA rules are the blank standards. The minimum, right? So I don't know about you, but I don't want to manage to the minimum. So you have to decide what's best for you and your organization. So if it's a scenario where people come and go, it might not be a good idea to write all those names because you have to constantly change it. So again, I leave it to you when I say it's a performance-based standard. You have to decide what works for you. And you know, to your point in the back, I've had scenarios where I grab a number and I call, and it's not the right number, it's disconnected. So, you know, whatever you put on paper, it can be audited, right? So, but however you decide to manage, I would recommend use the perception of we want to create a program that's going to save people's lives in an emergency, and we're in compliance with OSHA. Yes.
Yeah, I was just going to say that it comes down to accountability, right? You got to be able to, if it's not working, you have to be able to identify where the breakdown is, and also for employees to know who is responsible for doing that.
Agreed. Great. Any questions virtually, or we're good? Okay, great. All right, so and then train employees. We said that. And then respond to natural disasters. You have to plan for that too. All right, so where can you so you could you could answer it, or you could just think about it. Oh, hey, Bill.
One observation is that many companies will have employees in the field as service workers, perhaps doing HVAC, construction, other things. And their emergency plan has to cover the workers in the field, both in terms of how they would respond to the emergency and, of course, finding out how these people are and having a communications plan so that your workers have a way of checking in with you and letting you know that they are okay, aren't okay. And if they don't check in, they're missing.
Right. Absolutely. Great point. You got to just think through it, right? Again, this is easier. It's easy for me to stand here and tell you all what the rule is and what needs to be done, but the real work is actually implementing it. So that's why I started this presentation by saying, keep an open mind, because I know you all know regulations because you're safety professionals. But Are we actually implementing it, and is it effective? That's a different conversation. And that's why we take these trainings. That's why we do these refreshers. So you can go back to your employer and say, I just went through a seminar. This is on the top of my mind. Let's have this discussion. So I always encourage people, anytime you go to a conference, a seminar, go back to your workplace and actually follow up on what you've learned so you can show your employer it's a value added for you to go and get education because you come back and you're applying it right away. So just throwing that out there too. So where can you access your facility's emergency response program? And do you have any questions about your role? In general, do your employees know that answer? So if we went up to an employee and said, hey, if you have a question about emergency response, where would you go? Where do you get this information? They should have some sort of answer. Either A, I go to so-and-so, or B, we have a safety station that has, all these different information and we go there. But at some point, you got to have it either readily accessible. So you have to think through that, okay? Maps, emergency action maps. They, at a minimum, should include emergency exits, primary and secondary routes, locations of fire extinguishers, any fire alarm pull station, and assembly areas. Other items to include could be AED first aid stations, shelter in place, assisted assembly areas, even eye washes. I've seen people put fire extinguishers on there. I did look to see if there was a regulation that said you have to have maps at every exit door. I did not see it. Did not find that in the standard. But I think it's a great idea. I think it's a great idea. But I couldn't find where it specifically said you must have a map at every exit door. I'm yet to find that. But I still think it's a great idea. And you all know that, yes, got a hand raised there.
Just one quick question. So I had to do one of those literally today, and do it matter the size of the room? Because it was actually an office trailer, and I was like, what's the use of having this when they only got 2 doors? And
That's my
made me
point.
frustrated having to do it, but
Yeah.
does it matter the size of the room?
I don't think so. When you do a map, you're doing a map not for that room. You're doing the map for is it construction like a work?
Yes.
Yeah, so I don't think that's the intent. I think it would be more focused on, here's our construction site, here's a map, not necessarily how do you exit this trailer. That's at least my interpretation. Again, anybody can feel free to chime in, but that's how I interpret that. One of the great things, yes, we got a hand raised, and someone with a construction background, so appreciate that. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I was just going to say, so we have multiple large construction sites, and we have job site trailers where we have to, provide that information. We mainly focus on how we're going to evacuate the actual construction site, right? So we have maps in the trailer, but they encompass the layout of the entire project site and identify evacuation areas, determined by, where our entrances are and so on and so forth. So that's what we concentrate on. Really, the only thing we're showing in our job site trailer areas are first aid stations and AED stations. Yeah. So I don't know if that helps or not, but that's how we run it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great feedback. That's my understanding too. We got another person with their hand raised. And then virtual folks, feel free to chime in as well.
Do you have recommendations on where the evacuation map should be located or posted? Definitely in the emergency plan, but where in the location might it be posted, or best options?
I think it depends on the industry. In general, I like having a safety station. So I like, for example, wherever your SDS binders are, I think that's a good place, right? So if we're talking about a manufacturing location, then I like seeing a safety station that may have your SDSs. And what I always recommend is they have posters in English and Spanish that explain every pictogram. And why I like that is your employees don't have to memorize the pictograms. They just need to say what? I know where it's located. And so I think that would be a good spot. If you had this safety station, you have SDS binder, You have a poster there that explains the different pictograms, and boom, there's your emergency response plan. And if you noticed, wait a minute, did we cover evacuation procedure for this room? Oops. Oops. I failed the presentation. Dang it. Oops. Oh, wait, it's never too late. Okay, if there's an emergency, go out the door you came in. And there's 2 doors on the side. Why I brought that up is notice that there's a poster there on that corner there. Really good information. That actually tells you different scenarios. I like by the exit doors. I do like that. I like maybe somewhere in like a lunchroom or like a time clock. I like to put things that are important where I know employees are going to see them. So to answer your question, I guess my response is I like either a safety station or I like areas where I know people are going to see it. And I do like maps by the doors, even though it's not a requirement. I do like that. Got someone in the front here. Is that kind of helpful? Or?
We have a safety.
Okay. Okay, so you have a safety board. Is that you're kind of doing the same thing? Okay, so your safety board is you currently have it there, or are you thinking maybe putting it there? Okay, so we're kind of on the same page. And then that way employees get used to that. Perfect. Yes.
For the assembly areas, is there a specific distance they need to be from the facility?
Great question. I am not aware of a specific distance. The wording I've seen is a safe distance, which depends on maybe the emergency. But I'm not aware of a specific amount of feet. So, but keep in mind, I've seen assembly areas where employees would be walking in the path of where the fire truck would come. That's potentially problematic. So when you do put it together, think through how are they going to get there, what are the hazards associated to getting there, but that I'm aware of there is not a specific like how many feet. We got someone with their hand raised.
Facility, and they can be found in the ERG. The ERG does list minimum evacuation areas.
Perfect. So I don't know if everybody heard the start of that. If you have hazardous materials in your ERG, and there's a 2024 version that could tell you specific distances. Thank you. Appreciate that. Yes.
James from online. I have a question for this type of information. EAPS or WVPP, who is responsible for creating this on a multiple employer job site?
It's whoever your company deems as the administrator, whether it's a safety professional, a HR professional, a operations person, or they bring in a consultant. The employer has to have someone that's responsible for administering programs. All right, great. Good feedback too.
Sorry, Luis, I have one more question. I'm going to take this from one of our online attendees, Ernesto. If you can go ahead and unmute.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
All right, perfect. Yeah, I think another key point to bring up here, something to consider would be alternate evacuation areas or muster points, because sometimes you may be cut off depending on the type of situation or emergency you have. So it's always great to consider an alternate as well.
Great point. Great point. That's excellent. You may need, there's some scenarios where we follow, I'm trying to think off the top of my head, where incident command, ICS, where you have an incident commander, you have a communication, and you may need a secondary station or where we're going to work out of. Yep, great feedback, Ernesto. Thank you for that comment. Great. So, all right. So I also like this slide because it breaks down what we expect for evacuation procedures. So ensure all employees needing physical assistance are helped during evacuation. That's a good one. What if you have someone that, just injured their leg or their knee and they work in an office setting and they're not as mobile as they normally are? What if you have someone that uses a wheelchair as a means of, getting around, and they're in a wheelchair? How are they going to get out? That might be different. That's a great slide to think through how you're going to help people that need it. Confirm all employees and visitors have evacuated. We talked about that. You may need to do some sort of sweeps. Perform accurate head count. We talked about that. Ms. Sayel brought up the in and out program. Now I'm hungry for lunch. That's what any missing personnel, what do we do? Do we have their phone numbers? And then critical operation, who operates fire extinguishers? OSHA does allow for the pass method in training to cover for incipient fires, which is a fancy word for a small fire that's just beginning. Training people on the pass method technically could help with that for incipient fires, but that's, again, another point. If you've never felt or seen fire flames and you getting past training in a classroom without any hands-on, are you really prepared? Probably not. And then there's a scenario where people use the wrong fire extinguishers for the different types of fires. So things to also keep in mind. You may need to disconnect utilities, shut windows and doors, provide fire personnel with necessary information. In California, we have the CUPA and CSUDH report. That is an annual report that we're supposed to do that identifies all the hazardous materials that we have, where they're located. That's a report that's due typically every March. Fire inspectors do come. They audit your CSUDH or CUPA report. Perform an assessment and coordinate emergency closure procedures. I've worked at locations that have enough anhydrous ammonia to kill entire community. You need to work with the community. That could occur. Again, who's going to operate fire extinguishers, disconnect, shut windows and door. So basically the same kind of information there. So those are evacuation procedures that we're supposed to have in place. Great. So what's a successful evacuation look like? Well, I'd say a successful evacuation is everybody gets out and they get out safely. That to me would be my first determination, was this successful? But there is a time. How long did that take? So I would say if it takes 3 minutes versus 20 minutes, I think which one's better? The 3-minute one, right? But at the end of the day, if we get people out of the building and they're not injured, to me, that's a success. So these are the steps for successful. Leave the building, use your evacuation routes. To Ernesto's point, you may need to use alternative evacuation routes. Assemble in the designated area, remain outside until it's safe to re-enter, and report any problems. Now keep in mind, if there's a power outage, it may not be safe to go outside, because what if a semi-truck backed into a utility pole and now there's live energetic cords on the ground or cables? So it may not be safe to just say, let's evacuate. You would probably want to wait, maybe have someone like a member of management to say, you know what, there's a down pole out there with live cables. It's safe for us to stay inside. I don't know. My point is that you just don't always assume evacuate, because that may not be the safest. So that's part of the training that you want to give your crew or your people. All right. So you should know where your evacuation points are. They should be, I like to have them marked English and Spanish or whatever language you need. It's good to include that in training. I would recommend you actually physically show people, maybe even say, hey, now that you've been trained on evacuation procedures, let's take a photo and give me a thumbs up that you're happy that you learned. That counts as documented training. Yeah, here's their classroom training, here's their hands-on, and by the way, we took a selfie together celebrating that we know the evacuation locations. That, assuming they're okay with you taking a photo of them, that still counts as training. It's documentation. Yes.
Online, we have a question. Do you have recommendations on how we can assist employees who need physical assistance?
That's a. Do I have any recommendations? My recommendation would be to work with that person to figure out what they think is best for them. So I would start by saying, let's engage that person, talk to them, see what their situation is or their circumstances. Then I would get in HR involved for ADA, make sure we're doing things the right way. I would do some research depending on what help they need, and then collectively make a decision as a group. I personally don't have that much experience with that, so that's my generic kind of answer. Anybody have any more experience with that they want to share? Okay, perfect, perfect. Yeah, remember this, just because I'm the instructor doesn't mean I've experienced everything. So
it can be a little bit of the live mind situation, especially with HR and ADA issues. I do recall one time when I was sitting on a safety committee and we had brought up this issue. And I knew of somebody who could need accommodation. So I went to them and told them to self-identify. But then I got written up by HR for violating ADA because I went specifically to that individual. So what was decided is that at the safety meetings, we'd bring up the point that if you require any assistance in any type of emergency situation, please self-identify beforehand.
Yep.
And then when they self-identify, then you can go ahead and work with them individually to determine what kind of additional assistance they will need.
Yeah, that was kind of my soft, that matched my soft response to that. Yes, Bill.
At one firm where they had multiple people who used wheelchairs and walkers, part of their training for their emergency response team, since they were on an upper floor of a high-rise building, was how to carry someone in a wheelchair or on an ordinary office chair with wheels down a flight of stairs. And this was actually practiced as part of their evacuation procedure. It would have, of course, these individuals during an evacuation cannot use the elevator and cannot very well go down a flight of stairs unassisted in a wheelchair. So there had to be a plan on how to do this and training for the individuals who did it as to how to not get a back injury and not fall backwards down a flight of stairs while carrying a wheelchair.
As you said they practiced, there was multiple things running in my mind. But yeah, that's real life challenges. Yes.
I was going to say that's a great example because we had a person here with a wheelchair and there was no special accommodations needed. I mean, our meeting point was over on this side, and so she was on a wheelchair, no special
Yep, and to the point made earlier, it's that person, once you train them on this is what needs to be done, they analyzed and probably said, I don't need any special accommodations and didn't ask. So that seems like kind of everybody's saying the same thing. So that's good. I don't want anybody to get written up, so we're all saying the same thing, right? I want to come back to be a speaker next year.
Great example, I think, of this that came to my mind is the recent Altadena fire, and where they had the assisted living was under fire, and they had the evacuation plans, and they were just showing everyone being evacuated in their beds, their gurneys, their wheelchairs across the street. So just an example of that this stuff really does happen, and just being prepared and training.
Yeah, whoever brought up that question, great job. That was a great question. I'm kind of curious, the person that brought up that question, is that a challenge that you currently, or let me not phrase it as challenge, is that a procedure that you need to have in place, or are you just kind of thinking ahead? Just kind of curious where the question came from. It's a great question, by the way. Yes.
So we used to have in a stairwell a transport kind of chair that was better for the people evacuating the person as well as the person, going down there to maybe head off the back injuries and have good areas where they could grip and have stable transport. So there was just one or two, whatever. They hung them in the stairwell, so whenever you needed them, they're there.
Yeah, I was thinking that too, like on a stairwell, some sort of connection that can slide and guide. But that's why I'm not an engineer, because I come up with these ideas and people are like, that's not going to work. But then they say this would work or that would work. So yeah, if it's so starting from the beginning, If it's a hazard or applicable situation in your organization, you have to figure that out before. So great comments, great conversation from everyone. All right, so we talked about, do you know where your assembly points are? Do you know who the emergency response coordinator is? And what are 2 exit routes from your work area? So that's important to know and always be thinking about. All right, different types of fire emergencies. So oxidation, fire is a rapid oxidation reaction that produces energy. Fire requires 3 components: fuel, heat, and oxygen. Removal of any of these components will extinguish the fire. So I like to use this example. If you're cooking in a kitchen and your pot catches on fire and you put the lid on it, what element of that fire did you get rid of? Oxygen, and fire went away. So just again, very simplistic example. Vapor, when a fire burns, the vapor above the fuel is burning, not the liquid or solid fuel itself. A flash point is the temperature at which a liquid fuel gives off enough vapor to form an ignitable mixture. So think of like an acetone. It could have, so in this scenario, what is more dangerous? A higher flash point or a lower? Lower the flash point, the more dangerous, definitely. Think about a warehouse. If you have a flash point of 85 degrees in a warehouse, it can exceed 85 degrees. So that would be more of a hazard than if it had a flash point of like 130 degrees. So just an example there. You should know this. So what I typically, my experience is, you should do what's called a fire hazard analysis. And so you're not relying on luck. When we get these flammable liquids, how do we receive them? Where do we put them while we're waiting for storage? Where are we using them? I had a client that was using acetone, and right next to it, they were using tools that were not spark resistant. You've got to think, where are we using this material? That same company had a fire twice in their history because of rags that have acetone weren't stored or disposed correctly overnight, catches on fire. So those are things that you have to actually look for. So I call it a fire hazard analysis. You should identify any flammable materials or potentially flammable, decide when we receive it, what do we do with it, where is it stored, where do we use it, and how do we dispose of it. That would be, an actual assessment versus, well, I'm not sure, we're just getting lucky. Any feedback on that from anyone? Okay, again, does the standard say to do it that way? Maybe not, but I would recommend, I call again a fire hazard analysis. And then ignition is the energy source of sufficient temperature to cause ignition, matches, smoking, electrical equipment. Static electricity is an important one, because when you transfer flammable liquids, you could have potential for static electricity. So again, you have to look at how people are working and what they're doing with the material. All right, so flammable materials increase the risk of fire explosion and toxic releases due to fire. Materials include liquid gases or solids, liquids that have a flash point of more than 93 degrees. Gases are flammable in standard conditions. Solids may readily combust. So you want to isolate flammable material used and storage from ignition sources. And then in case of a fire, we want to yell fire, activate the nearest fire alarm or the pool station. We may need to call people, a radio, phone, or other methods, evacuate, and call 911. Don't assume that somebody has called for you. All right. Anyone in the virtual chat or in general? Hold on. I'll ask a question and the answer is up there. All right, so let me take that back. So act like you didn't see that. All right, so what does the PASS method stand for? What is that acronym? P stands for, good, pull the pin. AIM, A stands for aim. 1S stands for, yep, and the other one is good job. Has anyone put out a fire before, like a real fire using fire extinguisher? Okay, I see 2 or 3 of us. Okay, I remember the first time I put out a fire, a cord caught on fire and everybody started screaming. I said, time to be the hero. Grab the fire extinguisher, nothing comes out. What do you think? Nothing comes out. What about like it was expired, the fire extinguisher is defective? Why do you all go to the straight answer, you didn't pull the pin? That's what happened. I didn't pull the pin. I looked down, I said, wow, that's embarrassing. Pulled the pin, put the fire out. Now, mind you, I've done that training so many times. I didn't pull the pin. I was too excited to help instead of actually following my training. So keep in mind, as I mentioned, the more you train people, the more they practice, they will be ready, right? Think about professional athletes. They have to practice, right? Even if they may not want to, they have to practice to get better. It's the same thing for us. We have to practice to get better. I would say in general, portable fire extinguishers, you do have to have them. Bless you, the fire department will also regulate that. I would say this is my opinion. I don't necessarily think it's a great idea to have employees fighting fires. I don't really think it's the greatest idea. However, it does make sense because you do need people to do fire watch. And if they're doing fire watch, they definitely need to be trained on how to use a fire extinguisher. If they're part of an emergency response team, then they need to know how to use fire extinguisher. Just be careful though, because I've had scenarios where employees use the wrong fire extinguishers for the wrong type of fire, and really you could make the argument that's ineffective training. Yeah, I could see how you could argue that, right? Because if they were trained, they wouldn't have done that. But in the heat of the emergency, do people always remember their training if they haven't practiced? No. So if you're going to have people fight small fires, I would constantly give them reminders, refreshers, and trainings. So typically companies do have sprinkler coverage. You know, a temperature reaches a sprinkler head, it then will activate and then go off. So just be careful, because I'd hate to have a scenario where an employee gets their face burned trying to put out a fire where the sprinkler would activate and do that for them. So my recommendation is, if you're going to have people really fight fires, make sure they're really, really trained. If not, maybe it's best for them to just evacuate. But yes. That's what I'm saying. So the gentleman here just said, and then you have to have fire brigades. So to that point, I get it, right? If you're at that level, then clearly they need the training. But I'm referring to just your basic, employee that's there. Yeah, I get it. They want to help, but just be careful. That's all I'm saying. Just be careful, because again, we're dealing with people's lives, right? And we know that 90 to 95% of all injuries are due to human error. So that already tells us employees are going to make mistakes. So in a scenario where you're going to fight a fire, your back always has to be to an exit. Just in case the fire gets out of control, you can exit out. But what if they don't do that? Now they're stuck in this room when they could have evacuated sooner. So that's just my thought. Every company's different. Every operation is different. If you're going to have people fight fire, make sure they're really, really, really trained. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
The first fatality I dealt with ever in my career was fire related, and the person, there was a fire watch, and then the welder, they both used a fire extinguisher, and then the welder went for another fire extinguisher, went into the area that was catching on fire, and he never made it out. So I think I use that example, and I say, hey, when you have exhausted your fire extinguishers, you got to seek for help and make sure everybody starts evacuating.
Yeah, I'm sorry you had to experience that. I think that's a good answer, though. If you use one fire extinguisher and you can't put out the fire, then exit. That could be a good procedural to supplement. Hey, you tried. If one doesn't work, leave. Because really, if you can't put it out with one fire extinguisher, it probably isn't a small incipient fire anyway. So, yeah, that's a sad story that in your experience, but I think that made a better point than I could have. So thank you for sharing that. So fire extinguishers, yes.
Who should be providing the training? The fire department?
The employer, definitely the employer. I I don't think it depends where you live, right? Depends where you live, right? So if maybe it's a smaller city or smaller town, maybe that's a service that they offer, but not out here, right? Not in the LA area. We're not going to get that from the fire extinguisher, fire department. You could, for example, if you have a company that services your fire extinguishers, they may be a good vendor to use. I was at the National ASSP. They have these new electronic-like fire extinguishers. Honestly, it was a little difficult. I was like, they're watching me, and I was like, I can't get this thing to turn off. So it could either be, if you're going to do the pass method, your employer could do that. Someone that knows fire extinguishers, has a background, has done their research, that's fine. If you're going to have people do fire watch or fire brigade, I would definitely bring someone in to give them hands-on training. Absolutely.
So depending on who your vendor is for your fire extinguishers, some of those companies do offer training. I know in the past, they actually used to offer live fire training. I know a lot of companies have moved away from that, but also depending on which city, you may be able to work with the fire department, then depending on the size. I know that the Fullerton Fire Department has offered that up to some companies in the past, and back when Vernon was still viable, their fire department was offering it to any of the companies in the Vernon area.
I'm going to be doing a presentation next week in Vernon, by the way, so maybe I'll drop that as fire department advice. I agree. Back in the day, I used to see more fire extinguisher companies bringing that like hit and then do but I don't really see that too much anymore. Not as much. At least again. Now keep in mind, what I see doesn't mean anything compared to what everybody else sees, right? Just giving you my experience. I'm not really seeing that as much of an option anymore. So, but yeah, either way, if they're going to actually fight a fire, they got to have more extensive training. Fire extinguishers do need to have documented monthly visual inspections. That is a requirement. The OSHA standard doesn't say that the inspection has to be on the tag. That's not what it says. It says you have to have documented monthly visual inspections. So whether you document it on the tag or an iPad or a piece of paper, it's up to you. I would recommend you do both. And the reason I would be careful with the tag is after a year, typically they take the tag after it's been serviced. There's all your history of your monthly documented fire extinguisher inspection. So I would recommend both. Any questions on that from anyone? Yeah.
Fire code requires monthly testing of emergency lighting and emergency exits, and then an annual 90-minute stress test of any emergency lighting.
Right. Yep. Got a hand behind you too.
Proof of the documentation can also be a picture. So if you had it been signed a few times, you can just take a picture of it as well, because I had to provide that to OSHA before.
Yep, that would work too. Yep. Great. So and then obviously fire extinguishers have to have an annual check. That's a requirement too. Typically that is the fire extinguisher company. I've heard some people say, oh, technically you could do that yourself. I've never recommended or done anything like that. The monthly, yeah, I typically, someone tried to challenge, I said, that's up to you. Exactly. I don't, my experience is you bring in your fire extinguisher vendor, they do the annual check. That's my experience. And then the monthly visual, again, can be done internally. I like safety committees to do monthly fire extinguisher inspections. I like safety committees to do that, because then they're doing regulatory inspections that helps the company, and then it allows you to focus on more high-level, sophisticated, and/or problems that the company doesn't even know they have yet. All right, so we went through the pull, aim, squeeze, sweep. I told you this story that I'm just a little bummed that nobody, why did you all go directly? Is it the suit that made you realize I didn't pull the pin? But anyway, so make sure you practice. That's how to use a fire extinguisher. Aim at the nozzle at the base of the fire while standing at least 8 to 10 feet from the fire. Squeeze the handles together, releasing the extinguishing agent. And then why should we start? Should we start at the top, the middle, or the base? What do you all think? right? We start at the top, it's just going to come back up. So we start at the base, make our way up, sweep side to side. And how long do you think that fire extinguisher, if you're pulling that, squeezing it as hard as you can, how long do you think that will last? 15, 20, 30 seconds, right? It's fully charged, it's pressurized. So the reason I bring it up is it's going to go by fast. You're not going to have as much time as you potentially think. All righty. So the fire is small and not spreading. We call that an incipient fire or early stage. As the fire gets worse, we should evacuate. Make sure you escape the area. You always have your back is towards the exit. Make sure fire extinguishers, construction, they should be located every 75 feet. General industry, I believe, is 100. So a little bit of two different rules there. And they're talking about Class A versus Class A fire extinguishers should be every 75 feet or 100 in general, but Class B is supposed to be every 50 feet. So just be careful with that because technically if you do have an ABC fire extinguisher and it's a Class B fire and you're more than 50 feet away, you may not be in compliance. So just keep an eye on that too. All right, so here is the different classes of fires. So if I grab a fire extinguisher, it has pictograms and it has an A, B, and a C. Here's the way I remember this. Class A fires is anything that makes an ash. That's how I remember. Class A fires are anything that creates an ash. So ordinary combustible, wood, paper, some plastics. That's how I remember. Class B is anything that comes out of like a barrel, like a liquid. That's how I remember that too. So Class A is anything that's ash. Class B comes out of a barrel, so like a flammable liquid, oil, paint. C stands for energized electrical equipment. C, I think of a circuit. So Class A is anything with an ash. Class B, anything that typically comes out of a barrel. And Class C is anything that is like for circuits or computers. Class D is a little trickier. And I've seen Class D explosions and fires pretty badly. Employee, really bad situation. They were using a material that would self-ignite, and you shouldn't have included, they were adding water. The instruction said, do not add water, use mineral oil. And they said, well, we use the water because it's easier to clean up. They had a homemade valve, water in, a homemade valve, non-metered for gassing. We think one of them was closed on camera. There's an employee wearing what looks like a spacesuit. He was wearing all his PPE. They had an employee, she walked by with long hair. We think that caused a static. Boom, huge explosion. It was horrible. The lid popped open, it broke the employee with all the PPE. It shattered his elbow. It burned the woman employee so badly, the employee said it looked like she had, was burned from the sun. And they said, honestly, it looked like the cartoons where your hair was sticking out. They said she was running around. It was traumatic for me doing the interviews of what happened. There was no grounding and bonding. They weren't following procedures, and boom, that happened. So it can happen. So the way I remember, metals, it's Class D, aluminum, magnesium. The only way I could remember Class D is, damn, I can't believe that caught on fire. That's the only thing I could think of that was how do I remember this? So, and then K stands for kitchen, right? So cooking fluids. The example I gave you about the employee that used the wrong fire extinguisher, it was a fire with, it was tortillas that have grease, and it's a fryer. So some chips were smoldering in a bin, caught on fire, right? You've got a fuel source, you've got smoldering, there's your spark, and then oxygen. And he grabbed the fire extinguishers that were ABC, and I looked, there was 12 fire extinguishers. I said, well, why did you keep trying? He's like, well, I don't know, I just wanted to help the company. I'm like, he's like, yeah, it almost burned my face. So again, he wasn't trained properly because the proof is in the pudding. If he was trained properly, he would have known I can't use that type of fire extinguisher. or he didn't remember the training. So could OSHA make the argument that your training as an employer was not effective? It could. The proof is in the pudding. Why did he use the wrong fire extinguisher? Well, he got nervous and grabbed the wrong one. Okay, your training wasn't effective. So that's what I was saying. OSHA works backwards, right? Something happened. Well, there must have been a failure. Where was it? And then these are the agents. So for Class A, you could use air pressured water or dry chemical, ABC. When I worked at a bakery, we would use the air pressured water as an option. And we also had the ABC. So typically every fire extinguisher that you see is usually ABC, usually. Class D, you can kind of tell because they're usually like on a cart. So again, like I look at the fire extinguisher that's in the room here, it's an ABC fire extinguisher and it has the pictograms. Flammable Class B, you could use carbon dioxide, a CO2, a dry chemical, there we go, ABC or BC, or halon. Energized electrical, again, carbon dioxide or ABC. Again, typically what I see is ABC. And then for Class D, you want to use a Class D dry powder fire extinguisher. And then Class K has a specialized dry wet chemical. So you as a safety professional typically are not figuring out what type of fire extinguisher goes where, right? You want to bring in, you know, a fire protection specialist, a fire extinguisher company, and let them guide you. And then if you see, hey, this is actually a Class D fire, then you bring them in and help you. But typically, my experience is I'm usually not the one that's deciding what goes where, but I'm double checking. Okay, cool. So first aid procedures for fire and smoke. For all exposure, seek medical assistance. Remove the individual to fresh air immediately if there's smoke inhalation. Eye irritation, flush with large amounts of water for 15 minutes or until irritation subsides. Burns, major burns will be beyond the scope of basic first aid treatment. If possible, safely remove the affected individuals from the burn source. Burn requires specialized emergency medical attention. And then in-person inhales, the affected individual should get to fresh air and consult the SDS or poison control. So these are first aid procedures for fire and smoke exposure specifically. I'll give you a few more seconds to read that. This is referring specifically for smoke, fire and smoke exposures. Okay, we already know what the pass method is. Okay, what is your workplace notification system? So if there's a fire, do we pull the pool station? Do we yell fire? Do we grab a what do you call those, air horn and yell fire? So you have to decide what works, because some companies don't have an intercom system. I mentioned this. I said, if you have flammable materials, I recommended that you conduct a what? Does anybody remember? I said it a few times. Fire hazard analysis. Great job. Great job. Fire hazard analysis. And then what are some potential ignition sources? Well, we already showed a slide through that, so we'll keep going. All right. I like this one because this could happen anywhere. So we're going to do a little survey here. Does OSHA, besides the logging industry, we're going to exclude the logging industry, so none of you get me on a technicality, okay? The logging industry, you have to have people first aid CPR trained. That's a requirement. So outside of that, what do you all think? Does OSHA or Cal OSHA require employers to have employees first aid CPR trained? What do you think? Got a hand there. You think yes? On a construction site, you're saying yes? Okay. Okay. What do you think here?
Confined space program.
So I heard an answer of on a construction site, yes. I heard if you have a permit required confined space, that's a great example. Yes, you do. For sure. Especially if you're doing rescue. Absolutely. Good call. What else? What do you all think? Just give you a warning, the caffeine is starting to kick in now, so I'm like, let's go. What do you think? In the back? Someone get this gentleman a mic. That was a great answer. Can someone get him a mic? I'm going to clean up that answer, but you are like 90% there. Go ahead, say that again.
I think it's based on you have a medical provider on site or nearby. You got to have somebody to where they can respond to in case of a medical emergency.
Oof, that is very close. Almost complete. Does anybody, okay, Bill, does anybody want to complete? That's very close.
One other word is a requirement, of course, is any place where there is childcare or where someone has a custodial relationship, such as a place that provides services for the developmentally disabled. However, generally, the 4-minute rule would say that if you do not have the medical facility within basically guaranteed response within 4 minutes, that an adequate number of employees have to be trained.
Absolutely. So when you go to OSHA and you look up the regulation, so you would go to OSHA.gov if you're federal, you would click on standards, click on the drop down, you're going to click on laws and regulations. You're going to scroll to the bottom, click general industry. It's the same for in construction. And there is what it says, employees or employers must have people adequately trained in first aid CPR if a infirmary clinic is not near proximity. So the next question is, what is the definition of near proximity? In OSHA's letter of interpretation, it's anything that's 3 to 4 minutes away. So if your employer, if you're in a scenario where medical emergency response is 4 minutes or more away, you're actually required to have people trained in first aid CPR. I like what Bill said, adequate coverage, right? So depending if you have a 24/7 operation, you may need to have more people trained than if you have one shift. So that is actually the rule. Yes, I see a hand up. We'll get you a mic. That's important to know. So you could also find this in the letter of interpretations as well.
But the 3 to 4 minutes should be response time to the patient, all right? So you come to any of my places, you got a security, it's a big place, you got to walk down the hall 40 miles.
Yeah.
So that 4 minutes is tricky.
Great point, because I have clients that tell me, well, Luis, it's right half a mile away. I said, really? Where in the LA area can you get anywhere within 4 minutes? It's almost impossible. And to that point, okay, they get there, then where do they have to go? So if for anyone that's first aid CPR certified, for every minute that passes that someone's in cardiac arrest and someone is not doing compression for them, their chance of survival decreases by how much? I'll repeat the question. For someone that's in cardiac arrest, which means they're not breathing, or there's something going on with their heart rhythm, for every minute that passes that they're in cardiac arrest, their chance of survival decreases by how much? Yes. Wait, are you answering it, Giselle, or is a student answering it?
Philip from online said 10%.
Good job, Philip, from online. For every minute that passes, according to the American Red Cross, a person's chance of survival decreases by 10%. That's horrible. That means after 5 minutes, that person only has a 50% chance of survival. We all know I know we're safety professionals, but 10 minutes times 10%, that person really only has about 10 minutes. Now, if it was my loved one or it was me, I sure would hope that somebody would help me. Yes.
You also have to take into account the availability because the fire department that's a block away could be on the other end of the city busy and they won't be able to get to your company.
Great point. That's a great point. So I think it's good to have people first aid CPR trained. I think it's great for team morale. So now, are employers required to have AEDs? Are you as an employer required to have an AED? Depends on the building code. What does OSHA say? It's not required. However, per OSHA, there is nothing that says an AED is required, but if you have an AED, what must you do? Should you have an AED? Yes. Because remember, when we do CPR, we're doing the manual pumping of this person's heart to push oxygenated blood to their brain and vital organs. I recommend AEDs. I have clients that say, well, we're concerned if we have an AED, then what if somebody uses it wrong? Do we have more liability? I think that if you train people properly, an AED is very effective and very easy to use, really. It gives you direction. Now, mind you, I've never used an AED on someone that's in cardiac arrest, so I'm saying that it's easy, right? But in theory, it's easy. Yes, Bill?
There's one place where OSHA actually does require AEDs, and it is someplace with an organized program of exercise. So any place where there is a sports facility and your 24-hour fitness and Equinox and all of those places, they are actually required by OSHA to do it because statistically, one of the most likely places you will get cardiac arrest is the place you went to get healthy.
Right. And movie theater, public places, a gym, that they are required to have them, right? So public places. Good catch. I thought I saw your hand in the back. Did you want to add anything?
I was gonna ask if let's say the first aid expired, is it the same as not having one at all when it comes to OSHA? That was always a question I had to deal with.
First aid certification training, the supplies or the AED?
First aid.
The first aid training?
Yes.
Well, if you are more than 4 minutes away and it's expired, I would make the argument that you're not in compliance, because I would say, well, then why did you do it in the first place? And then my mentality or my thought process would be, if you're more than 4 minutes away, you're required, but then now you don't have people in compliance, I'd say you potentially could be cited for that. That's just my opinion, right? I'm not an OSHA inspector, but that's what I would think. Yes.
As you said in the beginning, the OSHA standards are the minimum.
Yep. Great. Okay, so it can be very problematic to help people in emergencies. I've helped people with missing fingertips. I helped someone that I knew was not going to make it. I still help them. It's not easy to deal with. And as I mentioned, with more experience, unfortunately, you get better at this. But it's not easy. And I think about all the people I've helped with amputated fingertips, and it bothers me, right? It's not a good feeling. But with practice, you can get better at responding. So remember, helping doesn't mean you have to physically touch somebody. You could still help. You could help by calling 911. You could help by standing outside the door that's card control access and having the door open so that when the paramedics arrive, you can open the door. You have another person, I'm waiting right here for you, follow me. So there's different ways that people can help. So it's not just get in there and start doing CPR or wrap their hand. There's multiple ways to help people. So it's up to you to create a culture with structure. This is what we want from people, and this is how we want them to help. Because if not, it's chaos. I remember the first amputation I dealt with, I walked in, the person helping the injured employee didn't have any gloves on. Okay. I said, who called 911? They said, no one. I said, where's his fingertip? I don't know. I was like, all right, you do this, you do this, you do this, and you just stop staring at me. So there's so many things going on at once. You got to be prepared, right? You have to plan this out. And so, that scenario where I told you I had someone, he fell 3 stories and hit his head against the concrete. Severe bleeding. A, do I try to stop the bleeding, or B, do I not touch them because I know he has a head and potential spine injury? What do you think? A, stop the bleeding, or B, don't touch him? What do you think? You said stop the bleeding or not? Yes. Okay. So advice, I don't think we should touch that person. If they have severe life-threatening bleeding, and if I don't stop that bleeding, what's going to happen? They're going to bleed out and they're going to die. So in some scenarios, you have to help right away. And you should be wearing gloves, right? If you're going to help anybody at work and they have blood, you have to use gloves. Please, please. Because your employer is also responsible for you. So it's not easy, right? Any life-threatening situation, we have to help right away. So I do the joke. This is the universal sign for, okay, and then you would say, are you choking? Your next question would be, can I help you? I hope you asked me that, right? And I say yes. If you take out your cell phone and call 911 as I'm choking, that's not helping me, right? At that moment, we have to help right away. So this slide says don't move the victim unless necessary. So if it's a life-threatening situation, we do have to take action. If not, then we don't want to move them if we don't have to. And then, call 911. Remember, we're not experts. Even if you're trained in first aid CPR, you're not a paramedic. If once they come, let them take over the scene. And we should have people trained. As I mentioned, you want to inspect your first aid kits, make sure they're in compliance. You don't have expired items. So you may need to do weekly or monthly first aid inspections on your cabinets, or you have an outside vendor that does that. Right here, stay calm. That's important. If you're not calm, you can't give people direction. And if there's an emergency and you're the leader and you're nervous and you're not calm, I think you're going to make the situation worse, right? When I dealt with my first amputation, I was like a general. Do this, do this, do this, do this. And then I went home and I cried like a baby. I really did. I was like, I'm a horrible safety professional. The guy was missing a fingertip. It was horrible. And I was embarrassed to go to work the next day. I said, everybody's going to look at me and like, you failed. And obviously I had to get over that. And I just realized or remember how many fingers and how many lives I've helped save. But it's not easy. It's not easy to do what we do. It's not easy to help people when they're injured, knowing or thinking, did I do everything I should have or could have to help this person? And the reality is it can't be just us, right? It has to be, starts with the person doing the job and their decision making. It's a, help management. It's not a one-person show. It just can't be. So make sure you have first aid kits. Again, they have to be inspected. That's an important detail. Eye washes, I see a lot of confusion on this. Eye wash bottles are not necessarily in compliance with this requirement because they may not provide the 15-minute continuous flow. So I do see a lot of confusion out in the field. The standard says that anytime employees are exposed to corrosives or injurious chemicals or liquids, you have to have an eye wash station available. So something like a plumbed is obviously going to do the trick, but even these type of self-contained eye washes, that will work. These typically require you to add a solution every 3 months or change out the water, but eye wash bottles are not going to help you be in compliance if employees are exposed to corrosive, for example. It doesn't meet the standard. And if employees are exposed to corrosive, they should be wearing goggles, not safety glasses, because a corrosive material can get on your forehead, go down in your eye, and cause you serious permanent damage. So I always remind people, if it's an irritant, yeah, your safety glasses are good with some gloves, but if it's a corrosive, you really should be wearing goggles and maybe even a face shield. Now, there are scenarios where the corrosive is diluted, but that's a different conversation, right? So, and then you have to have clear access to these. Imagine that you have something in your eye. You don't want to try to remember that you have to take a right, you have to take a left, and you have to jump over that hole in the ground, right? That's not how that works. You have to have clear access to it in the event that it's needed. So do you know where yours are at? Eye wash, a shower. I typically, the times I've helped people with washing out their eyes, I'm usually next to them. I have a timer, and then every time they say I'm good, I push their head back in there. I'm like, no, you're not. Has anyone ever washed out their eyes before? It's not the most comfortable, right? You're here, you're moving your eyes around. You're like, I'm good. It's only been a minute. You're like, nope. Stick to your head there. So that's important to make sure that you're doing that. And you should be supporting someone. If they're washing their eyes out, you should have someone with you. Now here's, yes. It's okay.
Eric, online, who determines what is appropriate content of a first aid kit?
Great question. ANSI has standards on different types of first aid kits for different types of industries and exposures. So there's an ANSI first aid or first aid supply standard that you can purchase, and it'll tell you the different types of industries and the different types of first aid kits that you need. Returning back to that 3 to 4 minutes, OSHA also says that if it's an office setting with less risk, it could be up to 15 minutes. Just to clarify that, y'all heard that, right? If it's an office setting with lower risk, OSHA extends that from 4 minutes to 15 minutes. Just wanted to make sure I say that too. Yes, Bill?
One of the things that is actually in the California OSHA standard is that the employer is supposed to consult with a physician in order to determine what should be in their first aid kit. However, most physicians are completely clueless about how to recommend items because they haven't been in the workplace and surveyed it for hazards. Therefore, they don't include typically, they include lots of gauze and tape, nothing for chemical injuries, nothing for severe burns. They go for the absolute minimum out of caution. So the employer should do an assessment on their own and then work with, if they have a physician they're consulting with, work with the consulting physician to get a list that would be an established fill for their first aid supplies.
Great point. Another option could be you send them your list based off the ANSI standard, have them review and sign off on it. That's a good point, Bill. All right, so extended power loss, you may need to turn off unnecessary electrical equipment, turn and drain the following: fire sprinkler systems, dam pipes, potable water lines, toilets. If you have extended power loss, move equipment containing fluids that may freeze, and then when power returns, electronic equipment should be brought up to ambient temperature before energizing. You know, you may want to turn equipment off so that when the power comes on, equipment isn't just turning on and creating more of a hazard. If there's a chemical spill, you want to assess the scene, make sure you have the proper training to do that type of work. Make sure your spill kits are being inspected on a regular basis so that when you do need them, you have everything that you need. I've seen scenarios where I open the yellow spill kit and I look and there's just trash in there. Somebody used it, didn't replenish it, and now it's a garbage can. So during a spill, that's not when you want to find that out. Going back to this one topic real quick. If an employee gets something in their eye, that may not be the time you want to read the SDS to determine what they should do. There are some chemicals that you may not want to wash your eyes out because it's not required. So if you have chemicals that your employees regularly work with, I would recommend that you look at your SDS. I believe it's section 4, and it'll tell you what the first aid measures are for all those chemicals. I'd recommend you give people actual direct training so they know, if this gets in my eye, do I take my contacts off? Do I wash my eyes? Yes or no? Again, in the middle of an emergency, that may not be the best time to try to figure it out. Someone's eyes are burning. You're going to say, hold on, let me read this SDS first. Give me a second. Right? It's not the time to do that. Okay, cool. So only trained employees should clean up chemical spills, assess the hazards, make sure that you're not putting yourself at risk. And you may have an environmental issue too, right? If, depending on what you spill, if it goes down a storm drain, then there could be some environmental exposures. If it goes down a wastewater drain, you may have some, wastewater issues. So keep that in mind, that a chemical spill could turn into an environmental issue very quickly if it's not contained. That's what I mentioned about your SDSs. They all have 16 sections now. I always look at section 2 because section 2 tells me what are the pictograms and the hazards. Section 4 tells me first aid measures. And I like section 8 because it tells me what PPE and if there's any exposure limit. So when I look at section 8, if it tells me there's an action level or a permissible exposure limit, then I know that employees may need air sampling to determine what their exposures are. So if it's a large spill, you should have training prior. You may need to call a professional company to come help you evacuate the building. And then if your facility has an SPCC, typically that's if you have X amount of liquids at a certain quantity, you have to have an SPCC, which is basically how do we inspect to make sure we're not leaking anything. Again, that would come also from the fire department, at least in California. So if it's a small spill, this was the bucket that I told you that sometimes I find full of trash. So that label allows you to know that's emergency spill kit. You could make the argument, is that in a language that all employees understand? Maybe that's part of the problem. Maybe there should be a pictogram that says no trash. Not sure. But if a small spill occurs, make sure the people are trained and they know what to do. Yes.
What is considered a large or small spill?
Great question. If it's more than one quantity than another. What is the actual definition? It's a good question. I don't know if I can't think of a technical definition besides just what I would consider small or large. Anybody, any feedback from anybody else?
Definitions on that.
Good point. Great. Thank you. Thank you. There is an ERG, Emergency Response Guide book. Anytime you get training in hazardous materials or hazardous waste, there's a book here that gives you direction and feedback like that. So thank you. I would start here as well. But if you're working with this chemical or you have it, I think that's something you would need to know. So maybe work with the vendor, look at what best practices to determine that for your specific chemical. All right, I see a lot of times employees get burned with chemical cleaning agents and then they don't report it. And all they're doing is suffering for 2 or 3 days. Because do you think that's going to get better on its own? I tell people, I'm like, why did you wait so long? Why? Oh, Luis, I thought it was going to go away. I'm like, your skin is like bubbling. I can see it. Okay? Don't tell your employees not to wait. Seriously, a chemical burn, all you're doing is suffering at home. If people get burned with chemicals, they need to go to the clinic. You know, just my experience, right? Get people the treatment that they need. So encourage them. If they get a chemical burn, it could be because they weren't wearing the right PPE and they don't want to report it. We got to get past that, right? There's no reason for people to suffer because here's the problem. If that gets infected, now from an OSHA perspective, your injury severity just went up. Had they reported it and you sent them to get medical treatment, the doctor may be able to help them right away. If they're suffering for 2 or 3 days, by the time they get to you, it could be severely infected. Now you're going to go from a maybe OSHA recordable for prescription medication to now lost time because it's so bad that they have to miss work. So really just try to talk to employees, make sure they're wearing the PPE, but really talk to them that you just got to report it. So if you get a chemical inhalation, remove the employee from the affected area, get fresh air, monitor them. If they get it in their eye, flush it out for 15 minutes, remove contaminated clothing, and then call emergency medical aid if it's ingested. I actually had a scenario where an employee, she tripped and fell and landed in chemicals. That was the first time I really had to deal with like a shower, take off your clothes because she fell into it. That was, so that stuff like that can happen too. So are you trained? Where's your spill kit? And how do you get your SDS? Severe weather could be, you know, a hurricane, high winds. Typically severe weather, we want to stay away from glass that could be broken and then cut somebody. Watch the monitor conditions. I've heard, you remember, wasn't there something in Tennessee where severe weather, they didn't evacuate and then the roof collapsed? I think that was in Tennessee. That's an example where those folks should have been evacuated. So we want to make the right decisions. I know this isn't easy. I had a scenario one time where there was a huge beehive right where the employees were eating. They said, Luis, what should we do? And I said, maybe we should get a water hose and hose it down. And I was like, you know what? I was like, now that I think about it, I don't know what I'm talking about. So I called and they said, whatever you do, don't hose it down. So just because you're a subject matter expert in one area, that doesn't mean you know it in another, right? So ask help if you're not sure. And that would be this scenario, right? Look at the alerts, see what the local news is telling you, but severe weather can be very dangerous. Again, I mentioned that. Flying debris, a collapsed roof, you could have trees that could hit you, power lines that are downed, lots of things that could happen. Drowning, hypothermia from cold weather and water exposure, flooding. So severe weather, I mean, we all know it's dangerous. The Mother Nature can really do big damage to us. And historically, it's happened all over the world, right? Floods, that's nothing new. So we do need to be prepared and mindful for that. So again, if you can, de-energize, secure hazardous material. So again, you just want to be prepared, and then you have to do any cleanup. And if flooding is a risk, build a barrier. You may need to evacuate, or you need to keep people inside the building. You're going to have to figure that out. Tornadoes, go to your designated shelter area, again, away from windows. Typically, you need to have these marked. Yes? Okay, so we want to have it marked, severe weather, so employees do know where to go. And then stay away from outside walls, use your arms to protect your head and neck, and remain sheltered. I remember, I was born and raised in Chicago. I remember us doing these drills in school, so makes sense, right? Earthquake can hit with no warning, especially living out here. Get under a protective structure and hold on, because if it moves, you move with it. Keep your head down. Be careful with overhead fixtures. So if there was an earthquake, this may not be the best spot for me to stand right below the projector, right? That old school saying, go to the frame of the door, that's not applicable anymore, right? Because not all doors have that frame. So I know that was back in the day what we all did. Evacuate only if instructed. Again, what if the power line is down and you go out there? It creates more of a hazard. If you're outside, stay outside, move away from buildings, tree, and power lines. Be prepared for fires or aftershocks. Those are all things that could occur. Flood or tsunami. Be ready when flooding occurs. Be ready to evacuate. Follow recommended routes. If you're outdoor, follow evacuation routes. Climb to a higher ground and stay there. Avoid walking or driving through water. If your vehicle stalls, abandon it. I actually had my first experience with this. I swear that water was up to the window, and I know I'm exaggerating, but you could only have a few seconds to make the right decision, because you may not be able to open the door anymore. The windows are down. So you may want to have a sunroof so you can climb out. So you got to make decisions very quickly, because people do die in their vehicles through flooding. So it does occur. And then hurricanes tend to have more warning. So we typically have more warning for hurricane. Remain indoor, choose a shelter, a small interior room without windows. On the lowest floor, a hallway, a room with no windows. And if flooding is expected, avoid the lowest floors. Blizzards, if we're back in the Midwest, that's a problem, or the East Coast. Go to warmer areas. Be careful with driving in snow. Again, I'm from the Midwest. I've had times where I lost control of the vehicle. A semi's coming right at me. I'm like, please don't hit me. It can happen, right? Black ice, those are all real hazards. So as an employer, you have to be paying attention to the weather, because even if it doesn't happen at your workplace, your employees are traveling to and from the workplace. If you're stranded, try to use reflective equipment or devices. If it's your employee, they may need to have reflective gear. That may be a scenario. So just run the motor for about 10 minutes, open the windows slightly. You want to be careful with any carbon monoxide exposure. You don't want to get hit by a vehicle. Those are all things that could occur. Heat is a big deal. There's 3 different types of typically heat illness: heat stroke, heat exhaustion, heat rashes, or heat cramping. So if someone's in heat stroke, they need to go to the hospital right away. And if someone's going through heat stroke, they're typically not doing what anymore? Sweating, right? Not always, but that typically is one of the symptoms. And you have to be ready to give CPR, because they may go into cardiac arrest. Wildfires, if they occur in the area, must be monitored. There is an app that tells you how healthy or how hazardous the air is, know the location of your shelter in place. Once the fire has passed, the risk of smoke and dust can create unsafe air quality. That's what that app tells you. If you must wear a respirator, follow all regulatory requirements. You may need to have fit testing, et cetera, et cetera. Workplaces in Oregon and California should refer to the Wildfire Smoke Safety Program. So what types of severe weather events are likely to occur? You have to do that analysis, have shelter in place and have it labeled. Does your work vehicle have an emergency kit? I would even say your personal vehicle. And who should you contact if there's a severe weather situation? All right, in summary, an emergency response plan outlines steps to follow in the event of an emergency. Employees should understand their roles and responsibility. Employees should understand what to do in a case of an emergency, how to respond, and if you're going to change your procedures and they need to be updated, all employees need to be trained. This is my contact info. You've got my phone number, my email, that's my LinkedIn, that's my company website. You can always message me on LinkedIn. You could always call me. I'm here as an advocate to help. So that is the end of my presentation. Yeah, cool. Cool. If you're virtual, you could still clap. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. I hope you learned a few new things and/or it challenged your status quo so you can go back to your employer and say, are we really prepared? Are we really? Thank you for your time and your attention. Yes, I see a hand raised. Yes, the slide deck will be available. Where it's available, we're going to make it available on the website.
The information for this presentation is live on our YouTube channel. It's being live streamed, so the link is on YouTube. It will also be on our website along with the presentation materials. Thank you, everybody.
All right, I'll be around if you all want to talk. I'll be around. Again, my info is there. You can contact me anytime. I'm a resource available for you all 24/7. No problem. Thank you.
We have some closing moments. Just hang tight for just a moment.
Yeah, oops. My presentation has ended, but the event is not over yet. I heard that there's a raffle, something like a Lamborghini or a Ferrari or something like that. Well, everybody's sitting down now.
For those of you who are still online with us, we just wanted to let you know that our website is available at csudh.edu/OSHA. You can find current course schedules. Our schedules are available through 2025 and 2026 will be appearing shortly. Or some of it is actually already there. And you can get registered simply by going to our OSHA website. For our online and our in-person participants, Jess, if you can go back to the badge. Yep. You can claim the official 2025 Safe and Sound Week OSHA participant badge by visiting this QR code or website, csudh.badgr.com/claim/capital US-CTB 7FV5N8C. That link is only available for the next 24 hours for those participants that have joined us today. Thank you.
I would also add that in the future, if you are hosting a safe and sound event, anybody can do that, right? And you can have your event registered on the OSHA website. They're currently not taking any more registrations for this week. But what you can do is you can go on the OSHA website under Safe and Sound and claim your certificate of participation as well.
Hi, everyone. This is Giselle. So I will be spinning the wheel, and one lucky participant that's still here will have the opportunity to win a free course. So for online and in person, I have Brian Long. Whoa. All right, and that's our winner. Congratulations. So this concludes our OSHA presentation on emergency preparedness and response. We want to thank you for joining us today. We've covered a great deal of information and discussed important resources available. So for details covered during the session, feel free to download the program's information kit. We have provided a link in the chat for those who are participating live, and it will also be available on our website. The recording for this session will also be online shortly on our website and social media. Stay connected with us by visiting our website and social media via our Facebook page and LinkedIn group. To receive regular updates and information about new courses, safety events, and the quarterly update, join our newsletter by visiting our website. We'll stay in session for a few minutes more to give everyone a moment to jot down last-minute notes and download info kit. We'd love to get your feedback on today's session. Please let us know how we can improve the quality of information provided by visiting. You can see the QR code right there. When you're ready to leave today's session, simply click the red leave button in the corner of your screen for online folk. Thank you.